Welcome right into the studio, Hidden Nation. It is Josh Cary, your hidden entrepreneur. Right here, you're tuned in to 710 WOR, the voice of New York, right here on the iHeartRadio network, which means you should have already downloaded that free iHeartRadio app. Those that know. Those that haven't yet, now is your time. It's free. It's on the App Store. What it's going to do is allow you to peruse any podcast like this one, all the back catalog, millions of episodes across all categories, and music. You like music? Who doesn't? All the genres you want. Hidden Nation, you're in for a good show, and this is one that is really near and dear to my heart. First of all, we're joined by best-selling author Pam Johnson, who wrote the book 8 Minutes a Day to Make an A. Quick change your ADHD child now. And why this is so personal is because I have 2 children. As you know, I have a 10-year-old daughter, an 8-year-old son, who have both been diagnosed with this. So I personally am interested, and through that, Hidden Nation, I know that there is a lot we can cover. Pam, welcome to the program. Thank you for joining.
Thank you for having me.
I love the description of your book. It says, using this system, your child can go from D's and F's to A's and B's within 4 to 6 weeks. And here's the great part, and stay there. Now, This speaks to me on so many levels because personally, I was a DNF student 30 plus years ago. Nobody helped me, but that's all in the past. I'm here to help my children and help the listener as well. How is it possible to go from D's and F's to A's and B's in 4 to 6 weeks?
Well, I wrote this book. It's a organizational and study system that I designed for my ADD students. And they can go, what it does is it helps them to compensate for their attention deficit disorder. And they do things in a way that helps them to retain information and to be more organized. Most of the students that I had at my learning centers, I was set up basically to teach skills, but I wasn't getting kids that needed skills. I was getting ADD students. And this was before they knew a whole lot about attention deficit disorder. In fact, I started the very first attention deficit disorder parent group to teach parents about it because they didn't understand. So the children that I got were getting low grades because they weren't turning in their work. They were failing tests. They were very disorganized. Those main 3 things. It wasn't their skills. Their skills were fine. I would test them for their skills. I was set up in my learning centers to test them for skills. That was not the problem. The problem is they were not turning in their work. And even if they did their work, they couldn't find it because they're so disorganized. They also had difficulty retaining what they hear unless it's interesting to them. They had trouble with all sorts of problems that you would not think would be a problem for them. So let me get started in order here so that I don't leave anything out.
Sure.
So I wrote this book to help everyone whose child or teen is not working up to their ability. I found these kids were not missing skills. They're above average in ability too. But the parents would come and say, my child is doing terrible in school and he can do it if he wants to. He's very bright. All my parents were so confused. They would take away their free time. They would ground them. They would not let them watch TV. They would do everything they could think of and nothing worked. So they would call me. They say, you got to help my child, my son. So after testing these kids, I found that their skills were fine, but they weren't turning in their work. They were very disorganized and they were failing tests. Those are the only reasons, the 3 reasons they were failing. That was it, period. They all were above average at least to above average. So what I did was I had to switched from teaching skills to teaching people how to deal with ADD kids. So, according to Dr. Stanley Greenspan, who's an expert on ADD, a good way to think about executive functioning is the ability to take in information through the senses, process that information in a sequence of actions that solves a problem. We can't do that very well. Most ADD people have trouble sustaining levels of attention long enough to see the task to the end without acting impulsively. Oh, I'll just do this later. Oh, this is good enough. They also had trouble holding information long enough in their brains to be able to do something with it. In other words, to pass a test, because they didn't know how to study. We are primarily visual learners, not auditory. What do they get in school all day? Auditory. So, and we don't learn by reading unless we can take those words and turn them into something visual. So that's what Study Quick system does. It teaches them how to study a different way so they can pass their tests. And they only have to do the study cards 5 minutes a day, and they're always ready for a test. And 3 minutes, the parents go through and monitor the children to see, okay, let me see your homework and let me see your assignments. And make sure that their notebook, their binder, or whatever, their computer is organized so that all this information is in there. Most of the people who are ADD do everything differently every day. They don't ever do anything the same way, so they get so many different results. This book appeals to anyone whose child is doing poorly in school, who's not missing skills, above average ability. They can do if they want to, but they're not working up to that ability. And the parents, is really sad. The parents would ground their child, punish them. You have to stay in your room. And that is not the problem. The problem is that they can't retain what they hear unless they do something with it. They have to we're very visual. We're not auditory learners unless we're interested. That's what throws everybody off. Every parent that came in said, well, he could do it if he wanted to. And if the want to makes it easier for us to do it. But how many times, think about, okay, we're going to learn about George Washington crossing the Delaware. That's not something I'm really interested in. So there's no want to in there. So it's a low level interest activity. So it's very difficult for us to retain that unless we do something with that information. Make it more visual. We remember what we see. We don't remember what we hear unless it's interesting.
So this is interesting because you were telling me how many people across the U.S. have this diagnosis?
6 million children.
So do you think that, because the first thing I'm hearing is that this book is just as much for the parents, right? Because
Yes.
I have to know how to help my child.
Exactly.
But then also, where is the responsibility from the schools? Are they equipped? Or is this just 6 million kids who are just struggling because there is no top down, top level?
That's why I wrote the book.
Isn't that a shame? So is it just another decade or two until this becomes an epidemic where the teachers have to address it? What are we dealing with?
Well, it is a big problem. A lot of people put their children in private schools. And I don't know if there's any private schools, because I've been out of this for a while, that deal with this. But I did have a mother who put her son in private school. And she said it didn't make any difference. Because if you don't understand, having ADD, I understand ADD.
Mm-hmm.
So they don't understand how the ADD child learns. The problem is that the way that we learn is by seeing and doing, not by reading and listening. And that's the way school's set up. So what this system does is takes everything that we see and hear and makes it visual. So that we do the little, it only takes 8 minutes a day. We go home, we look at the textbook, we transfer what's in the textbook into something more visual. And we study those cards for 5 minutes every day. And we get tokens for doing that. which we can earn rewards, and that raises our motivation and interest level. That's in here too. We will work harder if we know there's going to be a reward at the end, because we don't get enough dopamine. The majority of the population gets dopamine all the time. Those of us with ADD only get it when we're in the mood, see the need, or want to do it. So there's not really very much the educational system can do about that, because everybody's different on what they need and what their mood would be or what they want to do. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's not lost on me that from the beginning of this conversation, you're including yourself. You say we. So you were diagnosed when?
As an adult. When I opened my learning centers, I was so overwhelmed by all the details, and because I've always had very structured jobs before this. And this one, I had to be the one to structure it. And I went to the psychologist and I said, my gosh, I said, I can't do this. I bought these 2 learning centers and I can't do this. I'm just so overwhelmed. I'm shutting down. He tested me and he said, well, he says, I've got good news and bad news. He said, you have one of the highest IQs I've ever tested. He said, but you're so ADD, nobody will ever know it.
Well, why is that? Explain that to me. So intelligence gets blocked just because you can't apply it and display it?
Right, because the only time we get dopamine, which is a neurotransmitter that gives us pleasure, the only time we get that is when we're in the mood, see the need, or want to do it. But we never know what that's going to be. You know, I mean, the teacher could be talking about George Washington, and I'm going, oh, I hope I can stay awake through this class. Or then maybe she's talking about Benedict Arnold. Oh, that's really neat. I wonder if they're going to hang him. So you see what I'm saying? If the interest level is peaked, then we can focus. It's kind of like watching a boring movie versus an adventure movie. So what we have to do is we have to compensate, because there's more of them than there are of us.
So you're an educator. You've opened and ran schools and programs,
Yes.
right?
So my very first job was teaching 5th grade. And these kids were the lowest achieving 5th graders. And this is where it all started. I went into my 5th grade classroom, and this is in Las Vegas, Nevada, of all places. 90% of these kids had only one parent, and the parent worked not in the casinos and slept during the day, so they didn't have very much interaction.
Sure.
So I thought, I'm going to have to get these kids motivated. I know what, I'll build a motivational system into my classroom, which is exactly what I did. I went out and you can get chips in Las Vegas, so I got these chips.
I've heard.
And I had this big basket full of goodies that these kids had asked for, baseball, football, candy, all sorts of fun things for them. And they each had a little checkbook. I gave them a little checkbook, and they could earn tokens by answering questions, by turning in their homework, by making good grades, by not talking out of turn, so on and so forth. So all of a sudden, now I knew nothing about ADD way back then. But what I did was I raised their interest level. I gave them something, a reason to pay attention, I guess you could say. All of a sudden, these kids are making good grades. So much so that when the first grading period came out, the principal comes in my room with a real strong look on his face. He said, these kids have never made grades like this before. You're just giving it to them. So I said, have a seat. So he sat down, and I called on the worst kid in the whole school, Doug. I said, Doug, go up to the blackboard and put the solar system on there for the principal and label every planet.
Wow. Which
he did perfectly. So the principal looked at him, looked at me, took his papers and his book, and he walked out and never said anything else after that. Now, so what I didn't realize was happening was, by raising their interest level, it was easier for them to learn. It was easier for them to learn if their interest level was raised, because they knew there would be a reward. That's why when kids come home to do their homework, they need to do it right away. If they go outside and play, and then they come in and they're going to do something boring, they have to do the homework first and then go outside and play, because they know, when I finish this, then I get to do that. So their dopamine level is raised enough so that they can get their homework done.
Yeah, it does. But there's also something in the way that you're teaching them to do homework differently, right? So can you help
Yes.
me walk through this 8 minutes a day? Give me an example of an exercise or something that I would do with my daughter.
Okay. What grade is she in?
She's in fifth.
Okay. Give me a subject.
Well, reading comprehension is her more difficult one, right? She can't process the visual, the words,
Okay.
and then recite it back and answer questions.
Oh,
Reading
this is
comprehension.
perfect. Perfect for her.
Yeah.
So what she has to do is she has to take the very boring facts and turn them into visual things. Let me see if I have it.
In her own mind or some like through
No, on paper.
on paper.
Yes, she's going to make study cards. And on these study cards, for example, let's say she's going to have a test on this, okay? Right?
Yeah.
Eventually. And what was the subject?
Well, reading comprehension. They'll
Okay.
give her a passage and then a series of questions based on that.
Oh, okay. So what she can do, there's two different ways she can do that. In here, it's kind of like diagramming. And she puts the subject up here and then she draws the little lines, that pertain to the subject. And she can draw little pictures so that she can, I didn't know you were going to ask me this, or I would have had it ready. So that she can equate everything and show how everything relates to each other, like making little connections, little roads. And even pictures. Okay, like this. Okay, let's take the Stamp Act, which England imposed upon the colonies. So you have the Stamp Act in the middle, and you draw these little lines out. What was the Stamp Act? Colonists cannot afford the Stamp Act, the food from the Stamp Act. So then you have another one going down. All printed material must have a paid stamp. And then you write down documents, playing cards, newspapers. Those are the three things they had to have the stamps on.
Hmm.
And then over here, help pay for England's expenses. So it cost of supplies and an army to protect. So the Stamp Act was helping the government pay for the civilians' protection. So you get all that just from diagramming the whole thing that she's just read. And
So that makes it the visual. That's her
yes,
visual aspect, right?
right. And she can see the connection. We have to see everything. She can see the connection that way. Just reading something is not going to help us make the connection if we have to retain it, unless it's really interesting to us.
So there's a lot of, for someone like her, and I know for someone like you as well, how do we get past the point where she will shut down just at the point of information overload, right? Is that a very real thing she
Yes,
can't even begin to progress because she
right.
sees what information is waiting for her to, and so how do we even get like an open mind to take the step to pursue
We
this?
have to show her how to take it apart. Okay, so give me an example of,
Yeah, there might be a math problem. It's a word problem that has multiple different things that she has to do. And she sees, oh my gosh, for me to even approach this problem, it's going to hurt. And I'm going to be frustrated. I'm not going to be able to do it because she doesn't have the
so
tools yet,
so
right?
first she has to do is she has to look for keywords. So she has to have a list of the words, math words that mean add, subtract, multiply, divide. So she's looking for the keyword. Okay, I need to divide this. Okay, now what do I need to divide? So then you look for, and you're asking me things that are not in my book, but then you have to look for, we've got 50 pounds of flour and we have 30 people. What do we, okay, so how many people are going to get this thing that we have to divide? 30. So we write that down. So if she draws a picture, because she's visual, she can see it in a visual way, it'll make more sense to her because she's a visual learner, not necessarily an auditory learner. And words don't mean anything to her unless they're telling a story. And anything abstract, she has to take it and break it down. Like for instance, using 3x5 cards, memorizing information. It's important for your child to see the answer. You have to make it silly or outrageous so it's easier to remember. So example, on the front of a card, you'd put, what's the capital of Washington State? On the back, you'd put Olympia, Washington. So then he draws a picture of George Washington running the Olympics.
Wow.
So, and there's mind mapping for writing stories so that you can write a story much more easily, because she gets overwhelmed by all the different steps involved in writing and in everything, because there's lots of steps involved the older she gets. So writing is one of the most difficult tasks for most ADD kids, because writing involves so many executive functioning skills, and that's the area that we're not good at. So, and plus we have to think about punctuation, grammar, content, legibility of handwriting. I mean, it's a multi-step operation, and we don't do well with multi-step operations, so we have to break them down.
Yeah.
So writing without exception is the most difficult part, and we're very right-brained. We prefer to see things visually as opposed to more abstract.
Yeah,
So,
I want to make sure we have time for this, because I want you to speak to the parent of the ADD child for a minute, or even the parent who doesn't have a diagnosis on what's wrong, because that's equally as important. Because you said something earlier where people, some, let's say, ignorant parents, and I use that term just by the sheer definition of the word, ignorant, lack of knowledge, they think that, well, they're just not applying themselves, and if they wanted to, that's a dangerous area, right? So they should switch some thinking.
Right. It's not that they don't want to, it's they don't know how to.
And the parent needs to recognize that in essence.
Yes. I mean, all these parents have brought their kids in, and none of them knew what the problem was. And it was obvious to me right away, because I am ADD, that they're overwhelmed. They were not organized. They did not have a routine. They didn't have any structure. When they get home, they have to know, first I do this, then I do this. They have to use, when your kids come home, what do? Do they change their clothes and go out and play, or they sit down and do their homework?
Well, we've since insisted that when you come home, it's one of two things, and it's your choice. You could do your homework or shower. Typically, right? So typically they're going to wait to shower until later, but do the homework. But that's just, giving them the freedom to choose something, right? So they'll come home and yeah.
That's good, because then they feel like, okay, I chose this. So
right, you're making a decision. It's on you, right? But yeah, generally, like you said, it's not, okay, come home, relax for an hour, go out and play no, the homework gets done first and foremost.
Okay. So these kids, let's see. A good way to think about executive functioning is the inability to take in information through the senses, process that information in a sequence of actions that solves a problem. That's the main problem with ADD. Sequencing all this stuff so that we can do something with it. I remember a very depressed teen who came in. His mother brought him in. He was like 16 years old. And she says, I've tried everything. I've taken him off the sports team. He can't watch TV.
Wow.
We put him in private school. Nothing works. So I brought him to you. So I said, don't worry about it. I said, we deal with this all the time. So we brought his grades up. And I showed him how to study a different way so he could pass his test. These kids need to be ready for their tests all the time, because they can't just read the chapter and remember it.
Right.
So this book will show them how to make pictures and how to make interesting drawings, because usually these kids are very visual, and do real fun things with the information so they can retain it. So after I said all he has to do is spend 5 minutes a day with his study cards, which he turns what he reads into something visual. He turns what he hears into something visual. He studies those cards every day for about 8 minutes. And, the parent, just pulls them out at random to see, how well he's doing. So he's always ready for a test. He always writes down his homework and does his homework before he does something fun, because it's very difficult when you're ADD to do a low interest activity and know that there's no reward. But if you get to go outside or you're going to do something fun, okay, as soon as I finish this, I get to do that.
8 minutes a day to make an A. Quick Change Your ADHD Child Now by Pam Johnson, available on Amazon. Before we part, Pam, well, what is it like working with Authorunit?
Oh, they're very good. They guide me through the whole thing. I don't have to think about anything. I don't know anything about doing anything with my book, and they do it all for me. They guide me along, and they just set things up for me. So it's perfect for an ADD person like me. I don't have to figure it out. Now, the most rewarding part of using this book is that anyone can use it to help their child work up to their ability. And the parenting techniques that I have in here ensure your child will follow through with chores without arguing. Do you have that problem at home?
A little bit.
Oh, well, that's not bad. So basically, well, Susie, you get to go outside and play as soon as you put all your toys back on the shelf. Or Johnny, you can go outside and play baseball as soon as you finish your homework. So they know that they can do what they want to do after they do what they're supposed to do.
So this is absolutely a curriculum for the parent as much as the child,
yes.
right?
Right. It's not, the child is just, the child is the subject matter. The parent is the one that enforces everything and basically, let's see. Let me see if I wish I could be an ADD. I had this all organized. Children are very bright, but they have to do things differently to get the results needed. For example, they remember what they see better than what they hear unless it's interesting to them. And they need a lot of structure and consistency. And that's one of the big things I have in here, structure and consistency. When your child gets home, it sounds like you've already got that going.
That we try, yes, but that doesn't, of course, mean that there's no conflict or tension or stress when they don't feel like doing what needs to be done.
And so you can make it a little bit more interesting for them to buy some little tokens. They sell these little plastic tokens in places, and they can start earning tokens for coming home, and they get an extra token for not being reminded to start their homework, and they get their homework done. They get, so many tokens for each class that they've, classroom work that they've completed. And then they can save up for something that they want. And what that does is that raises their interest level. It makes it much more interesting to them because they're working towards something. Because this stuff is low interest level for them, but if they know that they're going to get something they want out of it, then it's easier for them. It's not bribing them. It's just easier for us to do something with low interest level if we know there's a higher interest level awaiting us at the other end.
Well, there you go, Hidden Nation. 8 minutes a day to make an A. Quick Change Your ADHD Child Now by best-selling author Pam Johnson on Amazon right now. Pam, this has been extremely, extremely valuable and beneficial. Thank you for joining in.
Thank you. Appreciate the time.
And I also appreciate the time you, Hidden Nation, have given us today. Go check out the book. I know you'll benefit from it. We're going to do this again before too long. Go out, do your best work. Tune in again next time. We'll see you soon. Take care. Be well.